Hi, everyone. It's great to be here in Krakow. There's seats at the front if you want to come and sit. My name is Naomi Papoushado. I am British, but I live in Tel Aviv, in Israel. And there's a few bits about me here. The last time I was in Krakow, I think, was in the mid-'80s. And I don't think I even made it into the old town. I think we visited some people who my aunt knew on the outskirts of Krakow. But that's about the same time that this film came out, mid-'80s. Does anyone here remember this film? Okay, good. Because I was looking at the age of the audience and I was like, maybe people are not going to get this film. This is probably the first time that I met AI. In this film, this really cute robot escapes from the lab, and he becomes obsessed with learning. And it's a bit, GIFs don't translate too well to the big screen, but he's reading everything, and he's learning and learning. He squashes a grasshopper, and he realizes that he has mortality. It's a really, really cute film, but I think this is the first time that I realized that more than people can start thinking and sort of having intelligence that develops over time. Today, there are many, many robots in our culture. You probably know everyone here. The earliest robot is this one up here, which is from the 1927 film. It's almost 100 years old, Metropolis. So AI is not a new concept. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is a little bit what is AI in general, how we develop AI products, and how we as content writers can do our best to facilitate people understanding what it is our product does. So I don't know how aware you are, but AI is absolutely everywhere. You probably know these kinds of areas that you yourself touch in YouTube. People upload so many videos, like 5 hours of content is uploaded every single second. So that's AI is labeling them and sort of categorizing where these videos are going to go. This is your postal system, right? Right? I looked it up online. AI has been reading handwritten addresses since like the 70s, so it's well established over there. Anyone with an iPhone, I'm not sure about Android, but I have an iPhone. We use our faces to get in, right? And even people who have iRobots, I don't personally, but people who do, it's using AI to navigate its way around your living room, right? You probably know AI is used in feeds like in LinkedIn and Facebook in order to give you material and content that speaks to you, that's, here you go, that is tailored to you and what your interests are. The algorithm usually is based on other posts that you've interacted with. So if you've interacted with a certain friend, then you're going to see more of their posts. If there's someone you're connected with on Facebook, but you haven't responded to any of their material for a certain amount of time, then you start not seeing their material anymore. These are a couple of examples. GPS, I'm sure everyone knows. I don't know if you use Waze here, but we use it a lot in Israel. This one is called Pango. This is great. I hope you have something like this here. This one I signed up, I don't even know when, I think 3 years ago or something. And now when I drive into a parking lot, it will read my car registration, sends me an SMS. I'm sorry about the Hebrew, but this is as much as I understand as well. I pretty much just click the link. And it does something, and when I drive out of the parking lot, it bills me. I don't have to worry about having small change and putting it in the machine, and where's the ticket? All of that's gone away. That's great use, I think. So AI, lots and lots of jargon. Does anyone here sort of work with AI? Are you you know about these terms, you don't know about these terms? Blank faces. One guy, thank you. 2 guys, thank you. So there's a lot of images, a lot of terms that get bandied around, but they can be sorted out into 3 main groups. We're talking about methods, which is how the AI is created, tasks, which is what the machine will do, and the abilities, sort of the end product, and what we can use those machines to do. And the three main terms I want to focus on this morning are AI in general, which is the big umbrella term which refers to how machines can think like humans. ML, which is machine learning, which is the process of teaching the machine how to think like a human without explicit programming. So it's not like computers were at the beginning, that we have to put in a lot of code in order to get it to do something in particular, but in order to get it to do thinking on its own. And then the latest one is deep learning, which is the way that the computer can start to build neural connections. It's much more like a brain than machine learning was. And in deep learning, what's interesting is that the machine will start to make connections between data points in a sort of network through understanding the context of the data points. Now, there's two main ways that we will teach the machine. One is supervised and one is unsupervised. In supervised learning, we tend to involve our users in helping labeling data so that the machine knows what to do with it. And in unsupervised learning, we're pretty much letting the machine do that thinking on its own. Both of them are used today. In my company, we use both types. A word of warning about AI. I also, as well as being a content designer, I also lean into research a lot, which is something that I encourage everyone to do. The number one thing that I've heard people say as soon as we mention, oh yeah, and we're going to have AI in this feature, they're like, oh no, not AI. No, we don't trust the AI. How do we even know the AI is accurate? So there's a big sort of block between people wanting to trust what your product does and the capabilities of what your product can do. The second thing is fear. Ray mentioned this a bit too. Fear of the, can the machine be smarter than I am? I don't think so. Nobody really wants to believe that machines can be smarter than us. The dependability of the machine, like is the insight that the AI is giving me, can I depend on that? Especially if I'm using it to make a decision, right? So that's usually what AI is used for. Certainly in the products we work on, people are going to make a big decision based on the advice that we're giving them, then they need to know that they can depend on that and make the correct decision that they need to make. And the last one is impartiality, which I think is pretty interesting because when you stop to think about it, all the information that we're feeding into the machine, whether it's supervised or unsupervised, is inevitably going to have some kind of bias in the data set. We're going to show one section of data. So how can we trust that the machine is actually going to be impartial to that? I work in high tech, and we have a system that records calls and then surfaces insights from those calls. But there's lots of AI being used in the judiciary system, in hospitals, and so on. So the impartiality of this data is much more crucial than it would be for my product, for example. People like the European Commission have put together guidelines on how to keep AI ethical. I should have written ethical here, I think. And that's in order to make sure that it's safe, make sure that it's dependable and robust and accountable, and to make sure that it is ethical. So these are things that we all should bear in mind when we come to writing, because we're part of that journey of translating AI into people's minds. So I just want to go over the process that your company will go through in order to develop an AI feature. This is actually something that I was pretty new to in the last year, even though I've been writing for AI for 4+ years. what people in your company, probably the product manager together with the data scientists, what they'll do is they'll sit down and they'll identify a problem that your customers are having. And from there, they'll try and translate how can we find this concept of this problem in the data. So for example, in my company, we're looking at how would a certain concept come up in phone calls? And then how can we sort of bring the technology in to identify these points? So then the data scientists will come out and figure out where in the data the concept surfaces and how they can identify that. Along the way, they'll be having a lot of customer interviews to figure out what sorts of examples make sense and support the concept. After that, we'll start teaching the model to recognize these data points. And the model will have to find everywhere that the concept appears. And once we've had a loop of our machine doing what we want it to do, we'll have trained it up there, and we'll start feeding in new data sets in order to sort of validate that the hypothesis that we had was correct. Lastly, we take a cycle of improvement. So where usually our company would start with a certain number of design partners, we can start adding new design partners who will have different data sets. And then we can see that the AI model is robust enough to identify the concept in different data sets as well. Along the way, we can tweak the model, make it smarter. The model will typically constantly improve itself as time goes by. And every new piece of data that it gets, it'll get better and better. And we can enhance the user experience also. So my recommendation is to get involved with all of this. As I say, I hadn't been doing it so much, and by talking more to my product manager, I was able to come into the process a lot easier, a lot earlier, and to understand what customers want and to understand how the model works, which will then help when you start writing. So by the end of this phase of your product development, this is typically even before writers will get involved, you should have a good idea of what the model does, how it's helping the customers, how the customers were doing the job to be done up until the AI will come in and help them, and the user's involvement and that kind of thing, to see whether the user will help build the model or whether it'll be transparent to them, but they'll be able to enjoy the insights. And so we come to our content strategy. Now, when I was putting together this talk, I decided, not to use any nice quotes like people usually do on presentations. I found my own 4 pillars for content for your AI, so I hope these will be useful for you because it really helped me to distill them. The first important thing that you must remember to do when you're approaching your content strategy is the transparency. Ray also spoke a bit about this. Make sure that whatever content you're going to produce is surfacing to the users everything that they need to know in terms of how we're collecting data, how we're using data. Mostly the data that we're going to be using belongs to the customer, correct? So whatever data sets are coming in, users will want to know, what are you doing with my data? How are you using my data? So these are things that you should think about feeding back to the users. The distrust aspect is quite big. So there are lots of questions in people's head when they're looking at the AI and they want to know, they want to understand how it works. So try and anticipate those questions and feed back to the users all these questions that they'll have in their head, such as, how does the model work? Can I change it? Can I control it? And so on. The next thing is to set expectations. What I've seen is that people will expect your AI to be both smarter and dumber than it actually is. So it's a good idea to kind of give the users the idea of what the AI will give them and what it won't give them. And generally, the rule of thumb is to promise lower and then over-deliver, because then you're just going to please people rather than the opposite. It's important also to explain the results. If people can't figure out how you got to the insight that you got to, or the result of your AI, then they're going to start to distrust it. They want to be able to follow the path and to understand how you got to something. So that's also important to surface, where we'll come to in a second. And lastly, this is actually something that we don't do in my company, but it is an option, and it's worth thinking about if you're writing, and that's to show how confident you are in the results. Sometimes results can vary. So an option to add a confidence level into the AI can be very, very useful. If there is more than one result, you can surface, you can say this one has a higher chance of being correct, this one has a medium chance of being correct, and so on. And that will help people, when they're taking their decisions based on your AI, to be able to have their confidence in their own decisions based on your confidence. So, what goes where? What information goes where? I personally I call myself a full stack writer because I do UX copy and I also do help center copy. So this map is kind of where I've pushed in content points for my audience along their journey. The truth of the matter is that the journey is a lot bigger than this. The journey starts when you begin marketing the product, and it comes into the product, and then it goes out into training and community and whatever. So it's worth being in touch with everyone in your organization and seeing how that user journey will take place, because maybe some of the heavy lifting about the AI will be able to be done through the training, maybe in the community. If the feature's already out, questions will start coming in, and then you can sort of loop it back and put more information in key points. Now, got to the point where we're going to write it. So, in terms of content for UI, the number one goal is keep it simple, stupid. Don't over-explain in technical jargon that nobody's going to understand. Make sure that your content fits the goal of where the content is. If it's in the UI, for example, in a supervised model, make sure that every page in the supervision model, which is going to be a set of modals or something, make sure that the information is helping the user get to the goal for the one modal that you're on. There's no need to go to the end or jump to the end. You can go one by one. Remember, as we all know, right, we're writers. No one's going to read our stuff. They scan it anyway, right? So make sure that the main points are going to jump out. And write in a familiar way. Write in a way that people are going to respond to. I think this one, the last one, is particularly important if you're writing for a chatbot. I personally haven't written for chatbots, but I think if you try and develop a personality for your chatbot that doesn't jive with the rest of your product, then people are just going to get turned off because they're pretty limited anyway in their responses to what people are writing. And if you're trying to be funny or you're just trying to give it a quirky personality, it often doesn't work. In terms of style, as I said, keep things familiar, keep things natural. Collaborative refers to, especially if you're doing a supervised model and you want to involve your users in how they're going to help the AI improve. I think most of the things I've written here are bigger than AI, right? They're ways that we can write for anything. But I think in particular for AI, it's important to engage your users. This was supposed to be a safety net. It's very difficult to find a safety net on Google that's not out. As I said, I like leaning into research, and I think it's very important for us as writers to work in a validation stage into our own work. So if you can talk to your users and see, especially if your product manager is already talking to design partners, if you can get on one of those calls, great. See if they're understanding the flow, if there are any concerns that come up throughout them using the product in its earlier stages, and that will help you understand what you need to write and address concerns and so on. And of course, constant adaptation and improvement as the AI model will improve, so will we, right? Now, AI is not always perfect. It can often throw up mistakes or even false positives. The most important thing here is to own it. Say what's working and say what the model is improving. People will absorb issues as long as you've communicated in a nice and easy way that this is the nature of the model as it is now. So, some takeaways for you. We've covered a few things here. I think the first point is to understand AI, what it is, how prevalent it is, and that we have the responsibility to be ethical and to be as transparent as possible for our users. I think it's important to remember that as prevalent as AI is, we're still distrustful as a community today. And I think I read somewhere that they think that AI models, computers are going to be able to be more intelligent than us within about the next 10 years. So in a way, anything we write today is a building block for the future, for people to understand what AI is and to trust it and to have confidence in it and to not just be turned off by it. My second point is be part of the development from the start. I can't say strongly enough how important I think this is. It means that you have to talk to a few more people, but that's good. Make the connections, and you're just going to get so much more depth to your content by knowing your users and where their issues are. My 4 pillars, woo! Transparency, the setting of expectations, explaining results, and confidence. And lastly, a loop of being able to enhance everything and to minimize the friction for the users. So a word about the future. As I say, AI is pretty much already everywhere, pretty much. And we're using it in our day-to-day lives in ways that we don't always consciously think about. The future's only going to have more and more and more AI, and it's going to become more and more normal. So really, don't be frightened of this technology. Embrace it, and just be a part of, forgotten the word, of sharing how powerful AI can be and placating people's fears. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great presentation. Do we have any questions? Yeah, you again.
Hello, I'm Mateusz from ES System, and I have a question regarding the future of our field, maybe, because we know that AI takes up more and more jobs nowadays, and surely it will be in the future. And I would like to know, what is your view on that? What will be the future of technical communicators? Because probably the AI and robots will take our responsibilities connected to writing. And what will we do in like 20, 30 years?
Great question. I'm not convinced that AI will overtake our our actual jobs. I think that we'll probably use AI in order to make our jobs easier in writing, we'll be maybe able to dictate, and we won't have to go through our laborious, I have to now publish, and it has to come out in the right way and all that. I don't think in the next 20 years we'll see our jobs waning because of AI. After that, maybe, I don't know. But I think you can be calm for now, at least. I don't think AI is there. Yes, AI can write, but where you see it's writing, it's not as advanced as people, and the uniqueness of content, which is ultimately, as computers take over, going to be our edge and our unique factor is not going to go away. I feel confident that we're going to be okay. Next question.
Hi, I'm Pavel from Krakow. The question I have is about, you were talking about building confidence in your users that the product is going to be, is going to work okay.
Yeah.
So could you give an example of, or just maybe 2 examples of what kinds of concerns you address, how you address them?
Sure. When I spoke about confidence, I was more in the direction of knowing that the result that the AI surfaced is accurate, so that I can take a decision from it. For example, in my product, we can sort of take intent from conversations, whether they're emails or calls, and so our technology refers to salespeople. We mostly record and absorb emails for sales. So one of the areas that we surface intent is when people show signs of backing off. We have a red flag. So if we've highlighted an email as a red flag, we need to have shown that somebody in that email has written something along the lines of they don't want to close the deal. So there's a million ways that people can phrase that, and it might even be phrased in a way, I talked to my boss and we didn't think we'd have the budget, but now we will, or something like that. So the words didn't have the budget or won't have the budget. If you were tracking just by a keyword, you might put that as a false positive and say, okay, this is a red flag. But because we see the context and we see they're speaking to the manager and so on, we can surface and therefore be confident in that.
So do you write a little section in documentation explaining that this is how this works?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And you have your SMEs review it a lot.
Okay, we have one question. We have time for one more question, and this will be a question from our virtual audience. I'm afraid that you will have to catch Naomi during the coffee break.
I'll be around, don't worry.
So the question is from Lorena. How about writing chatbots for technical users? Any suggestions for personas?
I think the most important thing is to stay on brand. Whether your brand is drier or more friendly depends on what kind of organization you work for. I think the important thing is to not give it a different personality, and just to be a person. Even though you're writing for a chatbot and that is a robot, you still want the person who's reading it to feel comfortable with the questions they're asking and the answers they're getting.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
That's it for the questions to Naomi. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Applause.